Hello and welcome to another installment of the tutorial series Make a Space Sim in Unity. Today we're going to continue our input and spaceship controller feature, and I'm going to show you how to add mouse control. So last time we just did keyboard, and so that you could go up and down and turn side to side, and then thrust forward and backward. But it's a little bit easier to control when you're using the mouse. So let's add that in, and maybe we'll adjust some of the keyboard controls to work in conjunction with the mouse, and we'll have maybe an easier to fly spaceship. And we'll probably have one more tutorial discussing controls so that we can complete our event-based system, adding a real interface to this system, and probably adding some other spaceship features like a real throttle, so that you can actually control how much output the engine is pushing, rather than just increasing the force added to the ship. So right now we're just directly adding a force to the ship, so it's kind of like doing like an afterburner or a push on the ship, when most of the time in space games there's kind of a throttle setting, so you can bring it up and bring it down, and your ship's constantly moving. So let's just get on with the mouse, and I'll show you how to do that, and then for the next tutorial we'll kind of do some refinement. So the first thing we're going to do is open up our player input script. So if you were following on the last time, you'll see it in your player manager, and then you can also find it in your scripts folder or wherever you may have saved it. Okay, so this is the player input script. As you can see, we have our events up here, and then we only have a keyboard input section. So what we're going to do is add a new section to our player input, and we'll just call it void get mouse input. And so now we can kind of call this function as well, and we'll track mouse input. And by breaking it up into different functions, you could set it up so that if the player selects no mouse, or maybe there's no mouse detected or something like that, you can disable or enable, or make sure the controls support whatever the player is using. So okay, so with the get mouse input, I usually like to use the mouse to control the pitch and yaw, but we're going to do this a little bit differently than we would with the keyboard. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to grab the mouse position. So make a vector 3 and just call it mouse position, or mouse pose, or whatever you want to call it, and set that equal to input dot mouse position. Okay, we're setting this into a vector so that we can grab the different x, y, and z values for this. Okay, so just to make it a little bit easier. Okay, so the next thing we want to do is we want to grab, I think I'm going to do the yaw first. So if you remember from last time, the yaw is turning left to right. So if we move the mouse to the left side of the screen, we want to turn the spaceship to the left, and if we move the mouse to the right side of the screen, we want to move to the right. And you can do this in a bunch of different ways. I like to set it up so that the further from the center of the screen, the stronger the pull is. So you'll see that in a lot of different space games, Freelancer for one. So this is kind of how you do that. So the way that I set it up is I'm going to create a float variable called yaw, and I'm going to set it equal to mouse position dot x. So now we have our the x value of our mouse, right? And we're going to subtract that from our screen width. So to get that, there's an object called screen, and it has the value of width. And then we're going to multiply that by 0.5, 0.5f. Okay, so what we're doing here is we're taking the whole width of the screen, so the width of the player's screen, and we're basically dividing it in half. So if your screen is 1,000 pixels wide, this number would come up to 500, right? And then we're subtracting it from our mouse position. So depending on where our mouse is, we're going to get a number of pixels away from kind of the midpoint of the screen, okay? So it could be a positive number, it could be a negative, depending on whether it's left or right of the center. So the next thing we want to do, if we want to make this similar to the get access inputs, where you kind of get a number between -1 and +1, we want to then take this whole math problem here and go outside the parentheses like that and divide it by the same calculation. So you could store this in another variable if you wanted to, if you don't want to repeat yourself, but basically we're going to find the position relative to the center, and then we're going to divide it by half the screen. Okay, so if your screen is 1,000 pixels, it's 500, so whatever the distance from the center is, divided by 500%, let's say. And what that will give you is a number between -1 and +1. So it brings it all the way down to a decimal value, basically. And you can use that as kind of like the strength of your yaw. So once we have that, the next thing I like to do with the yaw here, well, okay, is, well, I'll show you. Okay, so let's just add our yaw event now. So let's see, if yaw event, and we have our yaw event already set up because we did that in the last tutorial, does not equal null. Okay, we're just checking to make sure the event exists. You don't always want to assume that, so it's good to check. And then if yaw does not equal 0, then we will trigger our yaw event, and we'll pass in our yaw value, and that will be kind of our normalized yaw value. Okay, so now we have our yaw, so we'll be able to turn left and right, and as long as the mouse is not in the center, we'll move one way or the other. Okay, so I'm going to save this. You can press Control S if you're on a PC, and I think it's a Apple Command S on the Mac. Okay, so I've just updated this, and if we do this, I'll show you. So now I'm able to move side to side. Now, one of the problems with this is, in order to stop the ship from moving all the time, you have to get it super close to the center, okay? And you know, you might be able to, but it's kind of annoying in a game to kind of constantly being turning if you can't stop it. I'm doing a pretty good job actually finding it, but this is why you can kind of set up like a dead zone in the center of the screen to prevent you from constantly spinning. And one of the reasons for that is you'll see when you add pitch as well, if your mouse is kind of out of the center, you can kind of just be flipping around and things like that. So it's useful for the player to be able to kind of go back to center to straighten out their ship. So, so how do you do that? Okay, so before our event, we're going to do a quick check here. And so I do math F and ABS. So math F is a math library, and ABS just stands for absolute value. So since the yaw can be a negative or a positive number, I'm just taking this so I don't have to write a whole bunch of code for this or this. But if the yaw is less than a certain number, and we're going to call this the dead zone. Okay, if it's less than the dead zone, you could say dead zone radius or something like that, then yaw equals 0. Okay, so what this means is if it's below a certain level, then we're just going to stop the ship, and that way you'll have a little bit of wiggle room in the center there that we can slow down the ship. So I'm going to add this up here in the we'll make it a public variable for now, so you can set it in the inspector. You can make it a little bit, you can fix it up depending on how much space in the center you want to not move the ship. So we'll do that, and so just put this in here, and I actually like kind of 0.15. Remember, it has to be less. It has to be a decimal less than 1. So because the entire yaw only goes up to 1 on this. Okay, so now we're saying that the like 15% of the screen in the very center will be a dead zone. Okay, so once you have that, now we'll be able to stop our ship with a little bit easier. Okay, so, and I'll show you how this works in 1 second. Okay, yeah, do a quick show. So now if we fire it up, you'll see we don't move at all. Oh, okay, so now you'll see I have to move my mouse much further out to get it to go. So maybe 15 might be too much, but it all depends on what you think. So you could bring it down to 0.1 or even less, but you want to probably give the player a little bit of space here to not move their ship so they can go straight, for instance. Okay, so you also notice that the closer I get to the edge of the screen, the faster I go. Okay, great. Alright, so now let's flip back here, and the pitch, which is the up and down turning, is very similar to the yaw, so we're just going to be lazy and copy this whole thing. Alright, and now instead of float yaw, we're going to do float pitch. Alright, and mouse position, we're going to change the X to Y. And we're going to keep this screen width stuff the same, except we're going to do height. Okay, because now we're basing this on the height, and we'll keep our same check in here, but we'll put pitch in. Dead zone is fine. Now, did I do something here? Yes, I did. Okay, so we want to make sure that we're enclosing ourselves in here. Let's see here. Okay, so I think this is fine now. Yeah. Alright, we'll just tab this out. Okay, so now we have our pitch. We're going to check our dead zone. We're going to set our pitch to 0. Okay, so make sure everything that we copied over is changed to pitch. We have a pitch event. And if our pitch does not equal 0, then we will do our pitch event. And pitch. Okay, oops. Pitch. Okay, so now we are passing in our pitch to our pitch event. Alright, I'm just going to double check this. We're going to use our mouse Y position, and that's going to get our up and down. We're going to look at our screen height, make that into kind of a normalized number between -1 and +1. And then we're going to do the absolute value to check the dead zone radius, and then we're going to set it to 0 if it's within that radius. Technically it's a square, but it's fine. And then and then we'll do our pitch event, and if it's not equal to null, then we know we have a pitch event to use, and we'll fire it off if we have some number in our pitch. Okay, so that's how you do the get mouse input for pitch. Let's fire up our game again. Alright, so now you'll see, and this might be something too you want to set up, but depending on where you think the player will be comfortable with the dead zone, but so the dead center of the screen is where it is. But if you go up, you can go up, 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 and you'll see you can go a little bit faster, slower. Okay, And you can, now with the mouse, you can kind of go diagonally and things like that. Okay, so that is basically how it works. There's all sorts of stuff you can do to make the controls more sensitive, make them more adjustable. You can add sensitivities, modifiers to all these things. You can also set it up so that the ship handles differently, right? So we have our yaw speed here and our pitch speed, and we can adjust those. One thing that I actually kind of made a mistake last time was with the ship controller. I added the invert modifier to the actual ship controller. So let's open that up, and I'm going to take this out. And the reason I don't want it there is because the ship controller should not really care about whether the player is using an inverted control scheme or not. So, and all that is a negative or a positive number. So we're just going to take it out of that and go into player input, and we're going to add it back in. Okay, and so if we have our invert modifier, we can add it to our pitch event here. We could add it to this one here. So yeah, I think I'm going to add it right where we're setting the pitch. So we'll just multiply at the end. Okay, and then we also probably want to do it for our pitch event inside our vertical here. And so with this one, since we're not actually setting any type of actual number here, we're just passing the raw input. We'll have to do it inside the pitch event passing, but this will just pass whatever it is multiplied by the invert, so that should work. Okay, so that was just one thing I wanted to fix. So now the invert modifier is attached to the player input, and this would probably be set by some sort of player options, something like that, so it could be passed into this player input. Okay, so that kind of does it for the main part of the player input stuff that I was thinking of showing you, other than creating this interface so that the ship controller could run off of an AI or other input schemes. So right now we have a keyboard and mouse input, but we could easily create another version of this that fires off the same events, but with a flight stick or a gamepad. So we can easily do that. I think we would do that in the next video. So one last thing I'm going to show you, or I'm just going to modify this to kind of mirror my usual input scheme now that I have both mouse and keyboard set up, because I usually do both. I'm sure you're the same way. If you use mouse and keyboard, you're going to use both. So on the keyboard input, we have our forward event. Right now I have it set to this get access throttle. That's fine. I'll go into the input scheme and change it. Or I can just select vertical here, because what I think we should probably name it throttle, rename vertical throttle in the future, just so that it's easy to find what we're mapping to. But now vertical is basically just W and S, and I like those to do my forward thrust and my backwards thrust. Other people might do something different. I know, like in free space, it was like page up or something like that. But yeah, forward and back. Played enough first-person shooters. That's kind of where I think of for our increasing or decreasing our speed or moving forward. So I'm just going to do that for my forward event there, and then for the yaw event, we're going to do something different here as well. So yeah, what did we do? Oh, we did Q and E for roll. Okay, so the horizontal event for the keyboard, I like to do something called I like to do like a side strafe event. Okay, and so the horizontal would be the A and the D key. And so if you press A or D, you're going to strafe left and right. Okay, and we're going to have to create an event for that. So that's another thing. So we do that for strafing, and then the other thing that we can do is create another event. So yeah, we just got rid of our yaw because we have it in our mouse, and we're going to get rid of our pitch event as well in keyboard. And so in here we can do a like an up-down strafe. Okay, I'll call it vertical strafe event. Okay, and in here we're going to use it's actually the throttle keys I think we're gonna use for this, but I'll just do we'll call it, instead of vertical, we'll call it vertical strafe, and we'll go into our input and edit it. Okay, so call this vertical strafe, and we'll add it in, and we're not going to have a pitch event for this either. So okay, and we don't need the invert modifier for this. Okay, so this is basically going to move the ship up and down, just straight up and down, and the side strafe will move left and right. So if you want to kind of strafe around and in different directions, you know, you're in zero gravity, you've probably played Descent, that's kind of this kind of maneuver. So some games like really nerf this ability because they want you to kind of fly like a dogfight, but if you want to have it in there, this is how you would do it, and you can just make it not as powerful as regular thrust forward or turning and things like that. So if you don't want it to be super easy for mobility, you can do that. So okay, so last couple things we need to do. We need a side strafe event and a vertical event. So up here we're going to add two new events, and we'll call this one side strafe event, and this one vertical strafe event. And I think, okay, so that got rid of all of our red there. Okay, so we have these two. Our ship controller is going to also have to look for these, and this is again where kind of interfaces are going to come into play. You know, now we have a bunch of events, so our ships, whatever ship we're using, has to know that these things exist in order to control them. Okay, so before we forget, let's remember that we called this vertical strafe. Okay, so we called this one vertical strafe. That's the only one we need to add, right? Vertical strafe, yes. Okay, so in our Unity editor, we go up to Edit, Project Settings, Input, and okay, I have one called Throttle here, so if you want to get rid of the throttle because we're no longer using it, we're just using vertical, we can put vertical strafe in here. Okay, and I don't remember why we have negative and positive like this, but maybe this is right. So like if we want to go up, we have to go negative, so I guess that doesn't seem right to me. I think it's R and F, so let's see. So R on the keyboard is above F, so oh, so maybe that is right. So the negative will be down. I think coordinates are from 0 to 1, so actually down should be positive, so let's do that. Okay, so R on the negative and then F on the positive. Let's see what happens. Okay, so we got vertical strafe here. Just close it out. You might want to save your project, save your scene. Alright, let's see. We can't actually test it out yet. Okay, so now that we've updated our input, we're going to update our ship controller. Okay, so open up your ship controller, and then go to the top here, and in the start menu, or in the start function here, we are going to link up a few more events. So, okay, so we have our vertical strafe event, and our side strafe event. Okay, so if these two get called, we're going to do something with them, and then we're keeping these things the way they are. Okay, so we'll have to have a vertical strafe movement and a side strafe movement. Okay, so these don't exist. So we have to create functions or methods that do those things. So just like, let's see, we have a forward thrust. So basically, these strafing is just like thrust, right? So we're just adding thrust to a different side of the ship. Okay, so let's do side strafing first. Side strafe movement. Okay, and yeah, I think we're passing in a thrust here, so it will pass in some sort of float. Okay, so we'll just call it thrust again. And then we're adding force, and since we're moving to the side, we're going to add this to the right. And then we'll test this because we could be adding force to the wrong side depending on which side we're pushing, so we'll take a look at that in a second. I don't think you can you type in left? No, I don't think that exists. Yeah. Okay, so we might have to make this a negative right. Okay, so side strafe, and we'll just copy this, paste it, and we'll do vertical strafe movement. Okay, so now we have our vertical strafe, and where will we place the thrust on for this? Up. Okay, so we're putting it on the vertical. Okay, and one thing that you may want to change is adding these thrust powers. You can make a side strafing speed and a vertical speed and change these. So you just add more variables here for that stuff. I'm just going to leave them for now, but this means that you can basically accelerate in any direction at the same speed, which you might not want depending on what type of ship the player is flying. You can always vary those based on the different ships you have in your game, so maybe one is super agile like this, which would be cool. Okay, so I think we have everything we need to test it out. Okay, so let's see. Okay. So now I'm turning with my mouse, and if I press D, which normally would have turned me, I can now strafe around these asteroids. If I press A, maybe nothing happens. Okay, let's see. I'm going too far in the direction. Okay, so yeah, so we're kind of, with the inertia of the physics engine, it's a little bit sluggish to get the force going because you have to counteract it. Okay, and then now we're going backwards. So we probably want to edit our flight model a little bit. Okay, so let's see if we can go up. I'm going down. Okay, so the R and the F, I was wrong. Those need to be flipped. So now I'm pressing F to go up. Okay, so we will do that. So we can side strafe, and we can sort of do vertical strafing. And we can accelerate. We can still roll. Rolling is very slow. Okay. So one mistake that we made, if we go back into project settings, the negative and the positive for this, so this is F and this is R, and that should fix our vertical strafing. Let's just test it out real quick. So if I press R, going up, press F, gotta get the inertia, going down. Alright, good. Alright, so there you have it. Those are the main components of this player controller, so maybe next time I'll show you how to do the interface so you can set up different types of inputs and make sure all the different ships can take specified input. So hope you enjoyed this tutorial, and hope you're enjoying the series. Please remember to like, and if you haven't subscribed already, make sure you subscribe to the channel so you can get the updates, and we can grow the channel. That'd be great. And also, please take a look at some of the other content I've been putting out there. I did make a YouTube video about how to create these low poly asteroids. So if you wanted to put those in your space scene, go check that out. You just need Blender 2.8. It's a really super simple workflow to create these things. I know they're not, AAA graphics, but super easy to create and then get into Unity. So check that out, and I'll show you how to do that. Anyway, thanks a lot, and I hope you enjoyed it.